I wish to thank the organizers for inviting me and my team to present today, even though online at the Larvae 2024 conference. Let me acknowledge the other two members of my team that were very important in this work and the thought processes, Dr. Wisurut and Sudharma. This work is about how hatcheries have reduced the amount of Artemia in their operations relative to increasing the amount of larvae feed, and whether this has had anything to do with increased pond losses or failure rates in Asian shrimp culture. So we know that basically hatcheries, if we take the data for ponds and then we dissect out the different components as to what goes into performance, we find that hatcheries represent 15% of predictability in pond performance. In other words, hatcheries are important. And in the hatcheries, PL quality is what we measure. So hatcheries are PL quality and the genetics that go into those. So that's the combination of the 15%. But we know that PL quality is a major contributing factor to the influence of hatcheries on farm variance and performance. Now, we historically have measured post-larvae quality through factors such as the growth rate of the post-larvae, the evenness of post-larvae by coefficient of variance, stress tests such as a salinity stress to show that PLs can take high levels of changes in salinity without harming them as the main components. Also, that their PLs are virus-free or disease-free, such as even high levels of Vibrio. This all goes into what we consider quality or have historically. But is this missing something that's important relative to the predictability of how these PLs are going to do in the pond and the performance of a crop? Now, we know in 1980, 1990, 10 to 15 kilograms of Artemia cysts were used per million PLs. But in the last 10 years, those numbers have dropped to 2 to 5 kilograms because the price of Artemia have increased, and our larval feeds are doing a good job relative to the way we measure performance and quality using the standard techniques of length, stress tests, coefficient of variation. So again, what might we also be looking at? Now, the economics of Artemia nauplii, it is true that when we reduce the amount of Artemia cysts per million, the costs of hatcheries go down. But when we translate that over to farms, we don't see a big difference whether we're feeding 2 kilograms or 10 kilograms. 2 kilograms would be like $3 per kilogram of shrimp. 10 kilograms might be $3.03. So not a big sensitivity there. But if reducing the Artemia levels increased failure rates or lower survivals, then we do see a big difference in the economics. So we take the failure rate from a 2% to a 10%, and at 2 kilograms, we go from $3 to $3.26. And at 10, so that's 26 cents higher cost in that failure rate. Now, if using higher Artemia levels reduce that failure rate, then we would see that the use of higher levels of Artemia may save the hatchery costs, but does not save the overall operation and industry costs. So a new term has come up in the last 5 years, and that's robustness. And that's the shrimp's capacity to maintain high health in adverse environmental and pond conditions. And everybody is advertising robust broodstock, robust genetics. And genetics are part of the robust story, but also nutrition could be a very important part of the robust story. Now, to define robustness, we need something we can measure. So we've taken the assumption that immune peptide expression is a quantitative way of quantifying robustness. And we find that both genetics and nutrition impact that expression level. Now, the reason I say that is a year ago, we noticed that ponds can have EHP, which is a major disease. It's the microsporidian disease of Southeast Asia and Asia, but not have disease. Disease is exhibited by slower growth, high size variation. Whereas other ponds have high size variation and low growth, and they also are positive. And we related that to what we called stress. So low stocking, we oftentimes would have the pathogen, but no disease. If we have high stocking, oftentimes, or more than likely, if the pathogen is present, we will get disease. So we decided to go and measure two immune peptides, heat shock protein 70 and Propo, in both a stress and a low stress and a high stress situation. In the low stress, we find heat shock protein low, we call that X, and in high stress, it went up 3 times, 3X. And that was opposite of the Propo, which is 4X under low stress, and in high stress, it went down to X. So was that part of the story? If we maintain high immune peptide expression levels of peptides such as Propo and low peptide expression levels such as heat shock protein, do we basically have a more robust situation where the disease pathogen can be present, but no disease? Now, there is a genetic component. We have 2 different stocks. We'll call this Turbo and Turbo Plus. And we see with Turbo Plus, we have a much higher level of expression of peptides than we do with the base of Turbo. So there is a genetic component. But then there's also a nutritional component. So in this experiment, we had 3 different feed types. Artemia, 100%. Now these are extremes, but we did extremes just to see if there was something here. So Artemia, larval feed only, and ground up grow out feed. And we see that yes, size, basically growth rates differed. CV differed. Artemia gave much better CV. Survival rates were about the same. Stress tests were about the same. Now we then go look at 2 of the immune peptides, the HSP70 and the Propo. And at relatively levels, we found Artemia fed at 100% for both. And then with larval feed, it dropped at 50% with heat shock protein 70 and down to 34% of 100 of the Artemia with larval feed, and grow out feed was even worse. So this was basically our conclusion that nutrition acted with the genetics to create the robust level of a PL. So then we go and look at the different genetic types, the Turbo and the Turbo Plus, and then the 3 different feed types, Artemia, larval feed, and grow out feed. And we can see the differences here, where again, we see growth rates and then are different, and average weights, as you said. And something else that we measured was the length to weight. And it's not nutritional, but certainly there is a genetic component to length to weight. And Turbo Plus, which is our more robust strain, has a thicker tail. And this has often been assumed to be another QC factor. You want thick tails, you don't want skinny tails. And then looking at the genetics and the nutrition interactions, we have the Turbo and the Turbo Plus. And again, the Artemia, larval, and grow out feeds. And we find with heat shock protein, you basically get a reduction as you go to larval and then grow out as before. And then when you get to the genetic enhanced immune peptide expressions, again, you find nutrition interacts with that, and you get the best robustness with the Artemia-fed PLs versus with a PL that was fed the larval feed. So there's more work that needs to be done here. We certainly think that we have a start to showing the importance of Artemia in the hatchery right now relative to, low levels of Artemia versus higher levels of larval feed. So we want to show emphatically with different levels of Artemia to larval feed that we get different expression levels. That's in works now. We then want to also do more disease challenges with these different nutrition and genetic types interactions to see what the results are on actual diseases challenges relative to the immune peptide expression. And then understand the cost of post-larvae, or not just the production costs, but also that these impact the performance in pond culture. So tracing more, looking at what different hatcheries, how much Artemia different hatcheries feed against failure rates from those hatcheries. We know that there is a component to hatcheries and success. Can we relate it back to the larval feeding? So in conclusion, the highest cost in aquaculture is not to produce. It's not the cost of any individual component. So with that, I want to thank you for this opportunity, and thank you.